Started. My name is Thorp. I'm a systems engineer for Aruba Networks. Today, my topic title is Data Access Policy in a Post-PC World. That's a lot of P's. But I have PowerPoints, but I want to make this kind of a conversation about policy and what we're doing for data access policy. So this is going to be an interactive session. If you have questions, raise your hand. We're going to talk. This is not just me, a top-down discussion with my 12 PowerPoint slides. We don't have to get to all of my slides. I'm not in a race. I have an agenda, but it's loose. I want it to be defined by you and what the needs are in the state organizations that are represented here. So what is a post-PC world? Well, one of the things about PCs is that it was very much a user using an interface on a machine, talking to some other machine or data point. But there's a user involved in that process. And one of the theme of this conference is Internet of Things. And I can't tell you how much my cranky old IT guy is going to show here. Right? I hate that phrase, this Internet of Things phrase. Can't stand it because my PC's a thing too, and so's my phone. Right? It's just a way of, I think, putting some marketing buzz around the real idea that devices that are internet connected are exploding. And what's happened is that it's not just a user in front of a machine, it's also machine-to-machine connectivity. Okay? So what does that look like? What that looks like, so let's say you're a city water provider, and you put out these smart meters on all of the water meters in that city. So those smart meters they have an IP address. They're living on the internet. They're talking back to a central server. There's no user interaction between that device speaking and providing data, and basically a data channel to that central location. That's really what the Internet of Things is about. It's a machine-to-machine thing. And the infrastructure is kind of staying the same. We're talking basic network topologies, we're talking wired connections and wireless connections, but that's really what the Internet of Things is the idea that it's a device explosion. That's post-PC, this device explosion. We've been dealing with that for the past few years in our user population already. Okay? You know this because your users used to be, how many users do you have? I have 700 users. How many devices? I have 700 devices. Right? It was a 1-to-1 ratio. It's no longer a 1-to-1 ratio. You have 700 users, and all likelihood you have north of 2,000 devices. Right? Because the average is about 2.7 devices per user is the average on your network. So what that means is that there are users with 1, yes, but there are also users with 5 or 6. So that's the reality of what we're dealing with today. And honestly, I think that's where the state and where state agencies and where any organization is really focused. Because this machine-to-machine communication is very unidirectional, it's not bidirectional. There's not a big transfer of data. So in that water meter thing, it's not like the server is talking to the water meter. It's all about grabbing data. So that data is coming in one direction back to that server. In most Internet of Things topology like that, it is unidirectional. Now, in the consumer market, that's different, right? Consumer market, we're talking about connected TVs, connected refrigerators, connected washing machines. We were talking about this 15, 20 years ago, but now it's really happening. So that's the Internet of Things on the consumer, but that's not an impact to an organization. Because no one wants to bring their refrigerator into the office. No one's going to do that, right? They want to bring their mobile device into the office, right? So that's really what we need to be concerned about. So when we think about that, what policies do we have in place that recognize that? Now, here's the thing that the state is really good at. You guys are great at this. You make policy like nobody else. Right? Shake your head this way. Yeah, you make policy. You're good at this. Okay? Many of us, maybe in this room, it is our job to create policy. So, when we make a policy, I've got 3 questions. Okay? And those questions are, let me look at my notes here. First is how much time is spent organizationally making that policy? How much energy do you put into that policy as an organization, crafting it, creating it, before it gets implemented? How many people touch that policy? It's not a rhetorical question.
Okay.
Yeah, Doug?
We have our legal people look at it, or HR, admin,
Okay.
and so we niggle on every word, make sure it's all correct, and so it's countless hours, actually.
It's countless hours. It's something that you can't even measure, right? The time spent towards that policy, you can't measure the time because so many fingers are in the pot, right? And that's not a good or a bad thing. That's just how that is, right? I'm not saying that that's bad. I'm just saying that we spend a ton of energy crafting these policies. A ton. So since we spend so much energy on these policies, what type of policies are we creating?
The last one we created was a Microsoft Link policy.
Okay, so we're creating policies that can be technology specific, like Microsoft Link, right?
And I don't want that, but that's what happened.
Yeah, that is a poor use of your time. I'll be honest. But that's what happens, right? We create policies that react to the environment that we're in. Now, can any of you think of a national agency that's purely reactive and how they implement security? TSA. So you take the TSA, from our viewpoint, the way they implement security and implement policy is purely reactive. How do we know this? We have the data points to measure, right? You go to the airport, what do you have to do? After you got your ticket and you're walking through security and you get to the point where you're putting your stuff on the belt to go through the x-ray, what do you have to do?
Take off your shoes.
You gotta take off your shoes. Why do you gotta do that? Because some knucklehead tried to set his shoes on fire, right? Purely reactive. It wasn't because the TSA was doing something proactive. It wasn't because they were looking at a future threat. It's because they were reacting to something that had already happened, right? So now we've got these body scanners, right? You know, stand in the body scanner, you do this, you've got to hold your hands up and then you get scanned. Why do we do that? Because some knucklehead from Nigeria tried to set his underwear on fire, right? So how do you check that? Well, so we spend thousands and thousands of our dollars on those scanners so that we can make sure nobody's carrying plastic explosives in their jockey shorts, right? A purely reactive policy. And what's the problem with reactive policies? Say that?
It's after the fact.
It's after the fact. What else?
It's usually highly focused.
It's highly focused, right? So it's a Microsoft Link policy that's focused on a specific technology use. It's not a policy defined around unified communication and how this organization is going to communicate, right? It's not that. That's the policy you need, but instead you get the policy from Microsoft Link. Now, don't get me wrong, I like Link, it's a great product. But your policies shouldn't reflect the technology that you choose. Okay? Your policies shouldn't react to the threats that you've already dealt with. That's another thing, right? One of the things that we do as agencies is that we react as well. Okay? How many of us have proactively sniffed, gone through our web server code? How many of us have done that? Some of us have, and not many. We react when we get exploited. So when the web server gets exploited, it's like, oh crap, what's in our SQL database that's causing this exploit to happen? What code did we have that caused this to happen? We react. And the reason why we react is why? It's on the front page of the SAC-B, right? It's on the news. So we implement these policies, and these policies, the policies that come from events like that, I can't stand them because they're not effective, first of all, and they're not well thought out. Because we have to react quickly, don't we? We have to react quickly, so they're not well thought out, and they're laser focused on a specific issue, usually. Am I right? So I'm not saying anything up here that you guys don't agree with, right? I'm right on this. Okay, I just want to make sure that we're all on the same page. I don't want to be saying something that's not true. This is what I see when I go in and visit state agencies. The other thing is that you create these policies, okay, you spend a lot of time crafting them. Most of them are reactive, either to specific technologies or events. That's the type of policies you're creating. And thirdly, your rate of adoption is really low. Am I right? So you have these policies that your organization has created a lot of them. They're incredibly specific, and nobody reads them and uses them. How's that make you feel? What in the world am I doing, right? So, how can we fix this? How can we fix it? I want some ideas.
You're going to make them enforceable.
Okay, so you make policies enforceable. That's another, I didn't even put that up on the list, that's another thing, and I think that's the biggest thing, and we'll be talking about, I'll be spending most of the time talking about that, is the fact that most of our policies have no technical controls around them.
Separate policies from best practices or best industry practices. So instead of having a laser-focused policy saying you will use link in this way, have a communication policy saying use your communication, whatever it might be, to best practices. Then you can have a best practice. Best practices are easy to change, come and go, but your policies usually get locked.
So our policies can't be laser-focused. They need to be broad. What else about them? How many of us in this room are in charge, or partly in charge of our organizational security? Raise your hand. Okay, how popular are you?
Everybody loves that.
Depends on the
That's on your line, right? Our organizations typically don't like us, and why is that?
They don't like a lot of people.
That sounds like a personal problem. But typically, our big organizations don't like us as we implement policy and try to do security because we often kind of do it wrong. Part of it's our fault, okay? Part of it's our fault. It's because we come in and we want to make sweeping changes. This is all wrong. We got to do this better, right? So we come in to make these sweeping organizational changes because how we're handling data today is insecure. And so we want to take all that data and take it back to our corner and hold on to it, and we get to play with it, but nobody else, right? Because I don't trust any of you. So by doing that, by having that as an activity, we build up barriers. And if we're not doing that, guess what? The person that was in that position before you probably did. Okay? So that's the organizational mentality that you're dealing with. security equals roadblock, right? Security equals inefficiency. Security equals, takes me more time to do less things, right? Am I right? Look, I keep trying to check with you just to make sure we're on the same page, okay? So, we can't approach it that way, can we? We have to boil the frog. What's that? You gradually turn up the heat, okay? If you turn the heat all the way on, the frog's going to jump out of the pot. But if you gradually turn up the heat, the frog's going to stay in the pot and eventually get cooked. We got to cook the frog, okay? This is a slow, incremental process with an end goal in mind. Okay, that's part of policy creation. This incremental process with an end goal in mind. And the end goal in mind is that I'm handling my organizational data correctly, right? That it's secure, and that the whole point of security, right, is not to say no, it's to make sure that my business or my organization is efficient with the least amount of risk. The lowest risk that I can accept, or that my organization can accept. Because there's no such thing as a risk-free enterprise. You are going to have risk, okay? As soon as you get two people in a room, there's risk, okay? So the idea that you can eliminate risk in your organization, get rid of that idea. If you had that idea walking in here, I'm sorry to say this, there's nothing against you personally, but you're wrong. You can't eliminate risk. What you can do is mitigate risk. And you start mitigating risk by crafting useful policies. And this is how we're going to boil a frog, is by crafting useful policies. Now, useful policies have to be broad, okay? You have to be able to implement them. You have to have technical controls wrapped around organizational policy. It's not enough to threaten your user population with jail time when you have no way to enforce that. Am I right? I can stand in front of a room of 100 people and say, if you steal this data, you will go to jail. And if I have no way to see it or know if it happened, so what? I might as well be, talking to my hand. It's that effective. Okay? So we have to have controls wrapped around this. Now here's the thing. One of the controls that, and the problem with these controls that we created, these laser-specific controls, is that they create these crazy, ridiculous workflows for our organizations. So if you look at this image, right, you see all these different types of users and all this different type of service and all these different types of things that you need to do to gain access to data. And I'm not against creating controls, okay? No. I'm all about creating controls, but I'm about creating controls that make sense. So, two-factor authentication on a session that's coming into your network, absolutely, right? Encrypted sessions for trusted and untrusted connections, absolutely. I'm all for controls, okay? But you have to create those controls in such a way where your workflow creates a consistent user experience and you can consistently manage it. Does that make sense? How many of us have so many technical controls we don't know which ones do what? Anybody here, like, even marginally in charge of managing a firewall? Okay, so when you look at that firewall, do you have any policy rot? You know what that means? That means you have policies in there, A, you didn't put there, you have no idea what they're doing, and you're afraid to turn them off. Right. Okay? That's a broken workflow, is what that is, right? When you agree that's a broken workflow? So you've got to have workflows that make sense for your organization that's easy for you as staff to maintain and manage it. Man, how do you do that? Especially considering where we are today. Because it's not like I have 700 users and 700 devices. Remember, we discussed this earlier. I don't have 700 users and 700 devices. I have 700 users and 2,000 devices. In 4 years, I'm going to have 700 users and 5,000 devices. I guarantee you, it's going to happen. It's happening. Okay? So, because these are the people that are coming into our organization. Now, Aruba, we came up with this term. It's called Gen Mobile. Okay? Marketing, right? Whatever. But the thing about that is that what's different about Gen Mobile versus every other generation that we've dealt with so far is that it crosses age boundaries. Okay? It's not like, you know, I'm Generation X, and maybe the one after me is Generation Y, and before me was baby boomers, etc. Generation Mobile crosses all of that. I'll give you the best example I can think of. And for those of you that were data connectors and heard this, I'm sorry, you're going to hear it again. So, like many of you, I'm married and I have in-laws. And because I'm in IT, I am my in-laws' IT support. So, one evening, my mother-in-law calls, and I pick up the phone, it's like, oh, hi, well, Teresa's over here, my wife's over here, she's like, oh, I want to talk to you. Oh, great. So, I just got this iPad, right? My 70-plus-year-old mother-in-law, who'd never touched a computer in her life, spent her entire career as a nurse, and before that, a daycare operator, her entire life, never once didn't have an email address, never touched a computer. So what's happened is the technologies that we have met us where we live. And when I say us, I say everybody, right? From our, you know, when I see that 2-year-old playing games on the iPad up to my mother-in-law, it's everybody, okay? So technology has met us where we live. And that's Gen Mobile. And these, Gen Mobile, we're part of it, and it's also part of our workforce. And there's some defining characteristics about Gen Mobile. And some of those characteristics are that 65% have 3 or more devices. 65%. That means 65% of your workforce has 3 or more devices that they want to have internet connected. 25% would give up coffee before they would give up their smartphone. That's even in Seattle. And I think this is the most telling statistic here. 84% would not use a desktop computer given the choice. How many of your organizations provide a desktop computer in some form or fashion for every employee? 84% of them don't want them. Think about that. Now think about how much money the organization spends on purchasing, maintaining, and updating those devices, those desktop computers. It's a lot, right? It's a lot. Now think about the cabling infrastructure that goes behind that. Because every one of those desktop computers equals a network drop, an Ethernet cable. Last time I priced running Ethernet cable in a building, not cheap, right? And oh, by the way, speeds have gone up. So how many of you are running on Cat 3? I'm sorry, that sucks, right? So, and today, Cat 5 is barely good enough, right? So you're either Cat 5e or Cat 6. And if you're running Cat 6 cable, that is expensive runs, right? It's expensive. Why are we doing that when 84% of our workforce doesn't want to use them in the first place? Why, get a little personal here, why am I, as a taxpayer, funding that activity?
In part, it's easier to secure.
You have no other choice.
I have no other choice. And it's easier to secure. Now, that's a fallacy, okay? That's a fallacy, because I guarantee if I walk in your organization and I plug into any jack on the wall, I'm going to get an IP address, right?
Yeah.
Why? Okay, I don't authenticate, nothing happened. I get an IP address and I'm on your broadcast domain and I can do, I'm in, right? That's not good. And that speaks to the policies that we had in the past, right? And it speaks to also the inherent idea that we believe that a physical cable provides security. It doesn't. Okay? So, what's needed? What's needed in this entity that we're in now is a policy management as foundation. Okay? We've tended to create policy at our enforcement points. Where are our enforcement points? There are our firewalls, gateway routers, switch ACLs, right? Those are our enforcement points for policy. Am I right? So what happens is we create all these policies of all these different enforcement points, right? And none of them match each other, okay? They're different. Aren't they?
Mm-hmm.
Why are we doing that? It's because we hate ourselves? It feels a little bit like we hate ourselves if that's what we're doing. Because it seems kind of silly when we think about it. When we're standing in this room talking about it and think about it, it feels a little bit silly, doesn't it? Why am I doing that? Is it job security? Maybe in part, but the policy creation device needs to be sitting in the foundation of your architecture, of your infrastructure. That's where policy makes sense. That's at the foundation. It's in the center, the heart. Okay? So these policies, this thing is AAA, okay, that's up here. That's not new, okay? Not new. We've had AAA around for a long time. Most of us are, if we're implementing it, we're only implementing it to wireless users on our networks. Okay? And when we implement that AAA policy, and what is AAA? What does that stand for? Anyone? Authorization, authentication, and accounting. AAA. Okay? Those all sound like great things to me. And it sounds like a great thing to have at the center of your organization, doesn't it? To authorize your users, authenticate them using their credentials, and then account for them and their activity. Well, that's great. How come we're not doing it for wired users?
We do.
Some of us do. Most of us don't. Are you authenticating users that connect to a wired port in your organization? Most organizations say no, because they trust the wire to be secure. So we need to have a AAA engine living at the heart of our network that touches both our wired and wireless infrastructure. Now, I'm a wireless company, okay? I'm Aruba Networks. We do wireless, so we can talk about wireless all day, but at the heart, you need to have a policy engine that touches both. It's not like wired is going to go away, but it is going to go away on the desk. Those days are over. If you're pulling more cable to the desk, please stop. Nobody wants it, okay? Nobody wants a desk phone. Why would you want a desk phone? You've got a mobile phone that you carry with you. Nobody wants a desk phone, okay? We don't need to have those devices anymore. Organizations are moving to what we call an all-wireless workspace, where there are no cables being pulled to anywhere where people sit. Because nobody wants to stay stationary, talking about Gen Mobile. They don't want to be tied to an office space to do their work. They don't want to be able to do their work wherever they're at. Okay? It's not that they don't want to work. Okay? We don't want to work because that's how we get, that's what enables our lifestyle. It's how we get paid and how we buy the cool gadgets that we want to use in the first place, right? So it's not that we don't want to work, it's that we don't want to work in that constriction, in that constraint, to be tied to a physical spot. So you got to have AAA that addresses both. It has to have a comprehensive feature set. The thing that we've been using AAA for, that those of you that use it, are a yes-no conversation, right? What is that yes-no conversation? Doug, communicate.
Can you get an IP address?
Okay, I get an IP address. The yes-no is, I'm coy. This is my password. Do I get on the network? Yes or no? That's the yes-no conversation we've been using AAA for. Okay? That's not giving us any context. What if I'm coy using my own personal device versus the organizational asset that I've been issued? Okay? What if I'm coy and I have 7 devices, but a policy is only for 3? It needs to be a yes and, not a yes no decision. Right? Yeah, we still need to say no if I don't authenticate, but I need to authenticate and authorize that person based on context of the conversation. So we need to have these granular authentication methods, okay, that takes everything into account. And the policy structure needs to be able to handle that. So when we write these pen on paper policies that we write, they need to scale to what's happening in our organization, not just today, but 3, 5, 10 years from now. They need to be the kind of documents that live and breathe and that require little change. They also need to be the kind of documents that you can show and distribute to your user population and is easily understood. Right? Because if I'm writing something specific about Microsoft Link, I guarantee that not everyone in your organization even knows what Microsoft Link is. So why am I crafting a policy about that when I can craft a policy about communication and everybody knows what communication is? So I can make something a little more general and still apply the same level of controls. The controls are here, right? You put those at the foundation, but your written policy that's public facing reflects this, but doesn't match it. Does that make sense? Yes or no? Does that make sense? Okay, so the written policy that's public facing, that's simple to understand and is scalable, needs to reflect the controls here. And if you have a written policy that has no control, you've got to fix one place or the other. That can't continue to exist. You have to have the control if you have the policy. If you have the policy without the control, you basically don't have the policy. Okay? It's a paper tiger. It has no teeth. So one of the things that we've done, I want to go back a little bit to our love affair with the wire, is that we've built our security structure, our policy structure around the technologies that we've implemented. And one of the technology that we've chosen most to implement policy around is very old and is going away. And that architecture is VLANs. Am I right? That's an old architecture. We've been pretending for a long time that VLANs are a security mechanism. VLANs are not a security mechanism. Okay? If you think that they are, give me 2 minutes and I'll tell you why they're not. VLANs were created because switches got big with a lot of ports. And as switches got bigger with a lot of ports and we plugged more computers into them, right? All of these computers, they have this annoying habit of saying, I'm here every 38 nanoseconds, right? So the more computers you add to, the more people we jam into this room, jumping up and down, going, I'm here, I'm here, I'm here, I'm here, I'm here, the less relevant the conversation gets, okay? And if there's a central broker trying to broker that conversation, the switch, the more overloaded it gets more quickly. So we created VLANs to segment those conversations. Because we needed, it's called a broadcast domain, we needed that broadcast domain to be small. And the reason why we needed it to be small, because the switch architecture at the time, the processors that was running this, the ASICs that were handling these conversations, could not handle the load. That simply is why. There's no other reason why VLANs exist, okay? But it's such a cool little thing, this VLAN, that we started wrapping other controls around it. We can use this in other ways. Okay? I can make a VLAN reflect the HR department. And I can make another VLAN reflect IT. Okay? And I can make another VLAN reflect the executives. See what I'm doing here? Now I'm creating segmentation in my network that doesn't really map to how networks work. We're trying to map people processes onto how networks work. Does that scale? No, it doesn't. Why doesn't it? Because I don't have 700 people with 700 devices. I have 700 people with 2,100 devices. So if I've got Coy with his corporate-owned asset, that's one VLAN. But with his phone, that's another VLAN. And you see where I'm going? So this segmentation doesn't make sense, does it? Does it? We're segmenting the network based on a faulty mechanism. Not that VLANs are bad. VLANs aren't bad inherently. They did solve a problem. Broadcast domains were too big. Switches were melting down. Saw it with my own eyes. Okay? Many of us in the networking world saw that as well. But we wrap these controls around it that don't make sense. Where does the control need to be? Does it need to be on the VLAN? Do I need VLAN definition in order to create a control? Why in the world would I want to do that? I don't care about the VLAN. Why would I care about the VLAN? What I care about as a security guy is whether the user is authenticated, is authorized, and the asset that he's using is a correct asset. And based on those things, then I create a policy around that. Not around the VLAN he's on, or she. I don't care about the VLAN. I care about the user, the device that they're using, and the data that they're accessing. Okay? And that flips a switch. That goes from VLAN-based thinking to role-based. Okay? Now, that's nothing, I hope that's not a new statement to most of you. The idea of role-based access. Okay? But the problem is that we're still taking this idea of role-based access and trying to plop it on top of this VLAN architecture that we've had in our head for so long. It doesn't work that way. It can't work that way. Because then I'm creating a separate VLAN for every person with every device that they're having. If I really want to get that granular about, and who wants to do that? Shoot me in the head, right? Nobody wants to do that. So my policy needs to move away beyond this VLAN idea and be more about who, what, when, where, how. And then based on those things, you get access to these resources. And you can all be on the same VLAN. I don't care. The VLAN provides no security. There's no encryption in a VLAN. All it is a header on the TCP packet. It's not encrypted. Where should the encryption be? Should it be in the VLAN? No, it should be on the user session, right? That's part of the authorization process. So that's one thing we need to be doing. We need to be encrypting those sessions wired and wireless, okay? 802.1x, authenticate, and then encrypt those users. That's where it needs to be. And then what happens is, you see that that's not a big mechanism, that's a small one. That's a tiny turn of the knob of that frog we're cooking, okay? To make our organization more secure. It's a tiny turn of the knob. Because are our users authenticating already? Man, I hope so, right? They're authenticating already. So let's wrap some encryption around that. They don't even have to know, right? Because our infrastructure should be able to support the load of that encryption, whether it's wired or wireless. So maybe we need to upgrade infrastructure? Sure. If you've got wireless architecture that's 8 years old, yeah, you need to be thinking about upgrading. If you've got a switch in your heart of your closet that's 10100, yeah, maybe you need to think about upgrading that stuff. But you're upgrading to support that control. Okay? We're going to boil that fog slowly, and the best way to do that first is to recognize that we don't care about VLAN, we care about session, and encrypt and authenticate the session, whether it's wired or wireless. If I come into your organization as a guest and I plug into a port in an office, I should be prompted with a captive portal page, just like a guest would be on a wireless network. Just like if I go to Starbucks and hop on their Wi-Fi, guess what? That's a captive portal. Why do they have it? Because they want to know who's using their network, what devices are on it, how many people that they can market to with that particular thing, right? So, well, that's not our driver, right? Do you want to know who's on your network? Sure, you absolutely do. You want to know who's on your network even if they're a guest user. You absolutely want to know who that guest user is, okay? So we need to have these controls that we put in place need to be easy to implement. They need to be self-driven and automated. We need to take ourselves out of that loop, okay? Too many of us have been in this mechanism where when a guest shows up that needs network access, they fill out a piece of paper that gets submitted, and then that goes to IT, maybe a help desk tickets get open, and oh my goodness, why would I ever want to come and be on, you know, I'll just bring my hotspot and use that. And is that really what you want? Do you want your guests bringing their own hotspot into your organization because your guest policy is so restrictive and antiquated and unusable that they're not going to use it? No, you don't want that, right? You want to capture your guests and what they're doing on your network because they have physical access to your premise, okay? And we all know that security starts with physical access, right? That's where it starts. Security starts with physical access. So if they're in the door, they already have access. So if they're a guest, I want to know what that guest is doing. What data do they have access to? Did somebody hand them a thumb drive that they plugged in and now they're pushing data to Dropbox? I want to know that, right? And if they're using their own hotspot, I'll never know, will I? So how do I make sure that I know that? I create a guest mechanism that's easy for them to use and, frankly, faster than their hotspot. So they want to use your guest network, right? We want our guests to want to use the guest network. I know that sounds so weird to some of us in security, but we want people that are not part of our organization to be able to use our network while they're in our buildings so we have visibility into what they do. That needs to be part of your policy. And it needs to be easy to implement, and we need to take IT completely out of the chain. It either needs to be self-driven by the guests themselves or hosted by other people that they're coming to visit in your organization. And it needs to be simple. What about the devices that are coming into our network? What do I do there, right? Well, we need to have, I'm all for mobile device management, okay? Use MDM in a smart way so that you know what, so that applications that you want your users to use on their own mobile devices, they can use. That's the thing. Many of the organizations here, when I've asked organizations, said, what is your policy on bringing your own device? And many have answered, we don't allow it. Okay? Guess what? They're on your network anyway. And when you say we don't allow it, what you're saying is really, we're not tracking it. We have no idea how many mobile devices are on my network because we don't allow it. Therefore, because I've written this paper tiger policy that has no teeth, that says we don't allow BYOD, I don't have any control behind it. They're there anyway, right? So we need to have a policy that makes sense for our organization because they're all Gen Mobile. They want to use those devices. They could care less about the desktop that you're providing them. They don't even want it. They want to use their own device to do the work. because they want to be productive. So let's do MDM, okay? And let's have our policy engine that lives at the center of our network be able to tie into that MDM, right? Simplify that workflow. So I'm going to close with this last, a little bit of a case study, a customer example. None of you are as big as LA Unified, okay? And none of you have as hostile of a user environment as they do, okay? So if you think you do, you're wrong. Okay, they have 900,000 iPads on their network. 900,000. They'll be cresting 1 million before the end of the year. So you take a student at LA Unified, you give them an iPad, they take that home to do their homework. What's one of the first things they're going to do? What is this mobile iron crap on here? I don't want this. This is tracking what I'm doing. So I'm going to jailbreak this so that I don't have to use that. And I can still get my homework done, get it on the network at school so I can turn in my paper or whatever. But I'm getting rid of this because I don't want people to know what I'm doing, right? So they bring it back into, and this is what we do with LA Unified. Okay, every student has a tablet. They take it home. This happens, it's happening less frequently now, but this happens where they jailbreak the device, they bring it into the network. So they walk in, the network, the device associates with the network. Our policy engine at the center called ClearPass goes, whoa, whoa, whoa. You're not running mobile iron anymore. This device is jailbroken. See, context. It's not just about the student. It's also about the context of the device. So then the policy engine goes, I'm going to quarantine your access. So it sends the enforcement to the access edge, whether that's a wired port or a wireless access point. Sends the enforcement policy there to quarantine the device. And then on the back end, it automatically opens a help desk ticket using ServiceNow. So there's a ticket generated with MAC address, IP address, all the information that device has goes straight to the help desk. And then there's an email notification to the local school administration about that student ID. That all happens. Never did an IT person get involved in that process. Never. Enforcement, containment, and quarantine all happened without you touching it. And that written policy about you, thou shalt not jailbreak your device, now has teeth. Right? Is that what we want? We really do want our policies to work for us, right? If we want our policies to work for us, we have to craft policies that make sense, that are easy for our population to understand, and that we can wrap controls around. Easily. Not just I can wrap controls around, because you've been doing that, and those controls age and die, or someone else did it, and you come in and look at it and goes, this makes no sense to me, but I don't want to turn it off because I don't know what it's doing, right? Policies that make sense at the heart of your network. That's the policy decision engine that we need to create in today's post-PC world. Thanks for your attention.